as well as looking at other opportunities beyond academia, but that can still contribute to the biggest national system of innovation. So being cognizant of that as well, and the role that a postdoc training opportunities can provide to create those leaders in the future.
John Pettifor from Johannesburg. Again, related to what you're talking about is the career path of the individual who does a postdoc. And it worries me, and the comment that's been made earlier about, do we disadvantage individuals for having short periods of postdoc than having fewer trained scientists, but prolonging that, that postdoc period? Because what happens at the end of that postdoc? Are they, in fact, established researchers? Have they got the independence to develop their own research niche? And have they got the funding to be able to support through the PhD, through the postdoc period, and then you drop them at the end of it? And I think it must be very frustrating for scientists to not have that support that they would like to have when they finish their postdocs.
I agree more with you. I think we'll have postdoc here will come to you as well speaking.
So with Ghana, one of the biggest challenges that we have is the funding for postdocs within the pure research councils, like the CSIR. So you see that mostly postdoc programs are targeted to universities, those within researchers within the universities, versus those who leave after PhDs or they were within the research institution as technicians or assistant researchers and get a PhD, and then they come back or they are employed straight into the research institution, and they do not have any support. And the thing is that these institutions, I'm giving a typical example of Ghana's case of CSIR, where it has, in 2017, had to establish its own small grant system for postdoc early research careers. And this was as a result of this, because they have them, you recruit them, about 50 recruited at the time. There is no support systems for them. The council itself have a limited funding for research, for the main researchers, the senior principal researchers. And so there is none left for early research careers. And so this is really where the conversation is. Of course, the universities also have their challenges, but you can see, even within the presentation, that more is geared towards those in academia versus those in pure research, only research councils.
Thanks a lot. Lots of questions coming up. But again, I'll push back that question to you. Are we doing enough as science funders, as university, to position the role and the importance of after you finish a PhD? Because maybe the funding is going to establish researchers with the government position, we don't have frameworks, we've not sold that idea to say, this is the pipeline. You can't speak of innovation if you don't have support for postdocs.
Okay, thank you. David Ngigi from Kenya. I want to join my colleagues in their sentiment. And first is to appreciate this kind of initiatives are there in our continent. And I want to put this from the Science Granting Council's perspective, as you're saying, maybe as we define a charter way forward. Perhaps this is providing an opportunity for the granting councils to start collaborating around these issues of capacity building in the postdoctoral issues. And I liked the punchline for Future Africa, what they're saying, transforming the world through Africa research excellence. This is an opportunity for the granting council to grab this opportunity in terms of partnership along that line, because we have all these models, and perhaps the issue will be the framework, what we need, how we need to develop one. We already have something. We are not reinventing the wheel. We can have a hybrid of that. Because, of course, resources will always be a limiting factor. So they are around the issues of sustainability. How do we sustain this? And I'm seeing granting councils having a conversation around how we can sustain that. Because in Kenya, a while ago, we had started that. And perhaps what you are saying, defining what is a postdoc, was one of the key issues in terms of eligibility. Who qualified to join that program, although it was just a pilot phase of it. It is somebody who graduated with a PhD 15 years ago, or those just graduated within 3 years. So this discussion, it is important because it's going to help us move forward that agenda. And for me, I wanted the councils, we started thinking around the collaborative and partnership around this, because it's an opportunity for the council. Thank you.
Excellent. Can maybe pass the mic behind you.
Thank you. South Africa Medical Research Council. I think for me, we almost have to go back to why we developed these PhDs. Remember, there was that time when there was this drive to say, economies of countries basically rest upon the number of PhDs in a country. And then we went into all this drive to develop these PhDs. I'm not bragging, but I think the Medical Research Council actually has the gold standard for PhD development, the new innovative program that we have just put up some 4 years ago. I think that now that we have developed these PhDs, we have to go and ask the same question again to say, well, we have these PhDs, or at least we are developing these PhDs. Why did we do that? We didn't just develop them for them to say, I have a PhD. So we almost have to employ the same vigor and interrogation of the question at postgraduate level, at postdoc level. And what the Medical Research Council has done is to is to stratify that part of the pipeline. We have the postdocs, and one of the lessons that we learned when we developed the gold standard for PhD is that you should not have the person worrying about a short time frame, because you're not going to get the best out of them. You also should not have the person worrying about underfunding. So we match the funding to the profession. Like if, for instance, you're a PhD in biostatistics, you won't get the same scholarship as somebody who's a PhD and is a clinician. So I'm suggesting that perhaps our model, there is something to learn from that. Because within the postdoc space, we have the basic ones of the 5 years broken into 3 and 2 years. And then we have what is called self-initiated grants, which have been re-looked at. Now it's not just you apply for a self-standing kind of grant. We have again stratified that according to the age of the person, the age of the researcher. So the young ones between up to 5 years compete amongst each other. Then the next level, perhaps between 5 and 10 years, compete amongst each other, and so on and so forth, because that maximizes the chance of success of each of these, instead of having somebody with a 4-year-old PhD competing with somebody who has a 9-year-old PhD. Obviously, the 9-year-old is going to emerge and will be stuck under the senior researchers. So that's the second level of how we have stratified and maximized chances for success of the young PhDs. Then, then lastly, what we have done with that space of after PhD is concurrently run an excellence postdoc program. This is which we call the mid-career scientist funding, where we say, if you are now in a niche area, if the Medical Research Council identifies you as a potential leader, we give you a specific fund, again for 5 years, to build a team around yourself. The team could be made out of younger postdocs and so on and so forth. The point is to accelerate the race towards established researcher. So what's the point of all these three parts of the puzzle? It is knowing that it can't happen unless you actually apply your mind, even if you can't put the funding into it, but the structure has to be there. Then, because you are able to then look for funding against the structure that is rigorous. And I do believe that if funding was unlimited, I think we could be far, but obviously everybody has limited funding. So that's just something I wanted to share from our model. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. But that boils down, before we pass on the mic, in terms of how do we make that happen, in terms of creating opportunities for councils like the Medical Research Council and some of the centers funded by Carnegie. Where do you see the alignment, and what could be the next steps to make something tangible, considering the limited resources that we have?
I think for me it's leveraging. We have to stop talking about the Medical Research Council's model. We have to start having these real ongoing partnerships. Because if you have 100 million that's dedicated to postdocs, you probably can stretch an extra 50 million to 200 million if you partner with somebody. And that is, I suppose, the value of these kinds of forums, because again, that is what we're doing. We have thrown in some budget into the Deltas initiative in order to stretch the rents that we have. So for me, it is just leveraging and collaboration. And knowing that we're Africa. We're not South Africa, we're not Burundi, we are Africa. And we have to start understanding that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So colleagues, let's take that into account, the need for collaboration, and we'll start today. It's not like we are saying we will start, we are starting now. Thanks.
I have a different thought. Maybe some of you can agree. I think postdoc training is supposed to be more about leadership. Okay, let me just say what I mean by that. Having a doctor of philosophy in Africa alone is a worse training. We call it permanent head damage. It is the highest training that you can get from a highest, higher institution of learning. So when you bring in the idea of a postdoc, and you tell people that I am now a postdoctoral fellow, it even confuses them more, because to them, they know that a PhD is, yeah. So now, this thing you're doing, what is it? So first of all, we need to define what is postdoctoral training for our contemporary society to understand. Number two, I think we have some colleagues who are saying that we have been successfully condemned to institutions of learning. Because you have this very highly trained cadre of people who cannot fit anywhere except in these, either in universities or in such institutions. Like, for example, if you take a postdoctoral fellow and you're going to a corporate world and you're applying for a job, they tell you you're overqualified for this position. Either you go to the university and teach, or you go to a research institution. So besides us thinking about funding postdoc training, we should think about how do we maintain. It is like, if I give an example, like in the security circles, we have very highly trained cadre of what we call squads. Like in Kenya, we have the Reke squad. These are guys who are extremely trained to respond to very specific, situations. So we have very highly trained individuals who are called postdocs, who are think tanks. I could call them think tanks. And then you give them this 1-year training, and then after that, you just let them. We should think about post-post. People are talking about post-doc. What happens after the post? So that we maintain these highly trained people to be able to be leaders in specific niches in the community. I think that is, to me, that is the direction that we should think about. Leadership of these very highly trained individuals.
Thank you. So there's the element of leadership, which is within the postdocs. For me, what I'm taking up as well, thanks a lot for the comment, is this pipeline approach, the post-PhD. What does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we actually design such a system within the continent? So still the onus goes back to the funders, the science granting councils, this framework we are speaking of. It won't be very big, maybe 10 pages, which defines exactly the lifespan of a postdoc and looking at what it's supposed to do. There's very good models that we can learn from what has been presented so far. More comments?
Thanks, Seppo. I just wanted to add to the comment that was made about leveraging the resources that science granting councils and also higher education institutions already have. Because one of the comments that was made by the postdocs yesterday related to infrastructure. So that has a massive bearing on work-life balance for a lot of postdocs. So in a lot of instances, especially for those in the pure sciences, they have to go to Europe or the US and spend 3 months, 6 months, utilizing their labs. So one of the things that could also benefit postdocs, but also postgraduate students and also researchers at different universities, is if the science granting councils together with higher education institutions can develop some form of centers of excellence where they provide or fund a specific infrastructure which can be leveraged by postdocs at different institutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Farai. Can I have more postdoc talking, please? Postdocs, yes.
Thank you so much. I come from Makerere University, Uganda. I want to talk about institutionalizing postdocs in the universities and such institutions that really we work for. It's eminent that we are postdocs, but we almost working in isolation. The institutions we're working for, they don't recognize you as a postdoc. And it's not very clear that if I don't publish, if my student doesn't graduate on time, and the postdoc is ended, whether they are going to consider all these efforts that we have put in to supervise for our promotions. So we need to see how these postdocs are institutionalized in these higher learning institutions and have a clear home on how they can be managed. It is all about changing the mindset of the employers and the managers, the directors within our institutions. They need to know more about these postdocs, like any other kind of qualification someone is likely to undertake. Like the way they recognize when you finish the PhD and when they see you as a postdoc fellow, they need to really admit that and value it as an important work that you're working for the university. And also the issue of cost sharing is very, very, very important. When you look at a postdoc fellow, I was thinking those fellows can testify, they look at someone, they look at you as someone who's very rich, you have just finished and you have a grant, you're now moving around doing research. But we need to look at how can their commitment and how can they cost share. How can they bring resources together to make sure that this postdoc fellow is really supported to become a future research scholar? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. we will take all the comments into consideration, and then as well being cognizant that what we are dealing with is very complex. It involves a lot of sectors, it involves a lot of key partners to make it much more effective. It also involves how the policy systems within the context of a national system works. Checking or having that at the back of our heads as well, we need to ensure that whatever we come up with, there's that big picture that at the end will contribute to, but whatever we come up with, it's also tangible, it's doable. So what next steps can we take from this cloud here, from our institutions that we are representing, to take that first step going forward, and then we see how we can start changing the bigger picture as we go in the next few years and as we grow our networks. More comments? I see we're joined by Chuck Daniels. At the back there, you're busy. I'm looping you into these discussions. From your side, if you speak of postdocs, I'm trying to bring in a university outside Africa. Yeah, after the lady, maybe you can also give us some context on that.
I'm commenting on the postdoc from the forum point of view. And this is what I would suggest, that in the next design of the postdoc, they need to create a fund for the fellows so as to carry out their own research. Because from the institution I come from, you needed to be promoted on condition that you are the first author. So that is a motivation to the postdoc students. I also emphasize that since most fellows are scared of losing their families, it's important that we have the postdocs having their research or being attached to their host institutions so that you don't run away from your family that you left during the PhD journey. And probably if it's a must that you should go out, then probably you take on your spouse so that there are no issues of balancing career and family, because we know how important families are. And another thing is, within the postdoc arrangement, I would also suggest that we have tailored-made trainings, specifically on how to have skills in attracting grants, so that after the postdoc, you're not scared of other people being more competitive to be postdocs and you're phased off. So if we get those skills of writing grants, of publishing better, and creating our own niche, then we are able to think above the postdoc and create probably centers of excellencies, and then we are looked up to as people who are off the postdoc ladder, but are now looking at the bigger picture of Africa and the world. Thank you.
More comments, please. See, Chucks has avoided my invitation.
I'm sorry for coming shortly. I have listened to different presentations from Pretoria, from Future, whatever. I see we have diverse and different designs of postdoc models. And we know that this is the new animal in Africa. So if we don't understand how different people are doing it, it is imperative that if we could come with a unified model that can be tailored for Africa. Because if different, actually we are discussing amongst our fellow postdocs, how their thing is designed and how mine is designed, and I felt that I think there is a lot of discrepancies. So if we could have a framework which can be for at least adapted to the context of Africa and see how it can be retailed out to other universities that have not yet had this chance of incorporating postdocs in their higher institutions of learning.
Thank you for it's a summary, very good summary. We've got about 5 minutes or so, I think, before we wrap up. Are we still on time for lunch? Because lunch is supposed to start now, right? I'll take 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. Comments? Propositions? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to concur with the person who have preceded me that there have been a variation in the format of the postdoc. Postdoc is not formal education. In that sense, I don't see the need for a standardized format for all the institutions. Maybe the key element here, is especially for universities, and particularly the universities where he's coming from, where I'm coming from, is that we need to create a space for the postdoc, because the postdoc fellows are not officially recognized, though the university accept them to create space for them. Already, you know, we have problems of space. Most of universities across Africa, when even lecturers, they don't have offices. So we need to create also space for these young people who are coming in. The second element I wanted to bring on board is to continue dialoguing with the different stakeholders, including the managers of the university, about these issues of postdoc. I think that will be key for future, maybe recognition of the postdoc fellows and accepting that in our format, that when you have your second co-author, it is still your publication. Thank you.
Okay, that's, as you heard, somebody from the university system, being blunt as it is to say there's no opportunities for the universities. But that's to some extent, it's a reality, even if we have to face it. However, the bottom line from what I gathered today is that was the whole essence of this meeting as well. There's different stakeholders, there's different opportunities, and how do we create something out of this opportunity that we have here? In particular, the presence of the science granting councils. Most of them within the continent, they've been growing steadily over the last couple of years, 5 years, and as well as if you look at the Science Granting Council initiative, it was created to actually look at mechanisms that can start helping or improving how the funders, science granting councils, improve their responsibilities in terms of growing the science cohort within the specific national systems. Most of them are represented here. So now the onus is on the science granting councils working with respective partners at the national, regional, as well as the global level to think of ways to collectively identify approaches that can improve postdocs going forward. The first step, I do agree with your comments, the last comments, but however, we need to have a clear definition of a postdoc. It can't be business as usual. We don't have space. It's not formal. Let's leave it like that because it's like that. We've been doing it the last X number of years. That can't be business as usual, and it's not productive. It's at the end of the day, we are speaking of somebody who spent their lives doing a PhD. We don't have a plan for them, and they leave the continent, and we don't have innovation in the continent. So let's think big. I know some of the things are not doable. They're beyond what we can control, but we can start with the big picture and see what we can create out of it. So I'll propose, as Filippo said, the first step will be that framework, which could potentially be led by the Science Granting Council initiative, working with Carnegie and other partners here, as well as the Medical Research Council. So we are the cohort with the document. Not too long a document, but a very sweet 15 pages that defines what a postdoc is and the model that we want to create for postdoc support in the continent. And besides that, now we start looking at what type of networks in the continent and beyond do we start tapping in. So that will be the baseline document, I think, that will take us going forward. We could speak on who lead that, but I think, Melody, we can see it later on. We've got all your emails. We can make it as a deliverable by early next year when we have the next SGCI and GRC in May in South Africa as one of the key outcomes that came out of this meeting, and going forward, that's what we want to push forward. That could as well potentially, whatever comes out of that, could now even potentially go back to Carnegie, where we start informing them to say, this is what's happening in the continent, this is the message we are getting through their funding of this 2-year program to look at the programs that Carnegie has been supporting. So maybe we can build that one in. And I'm glad there are different modalities that we can learn from the Carnegie perspective, the models that were presented, the Medical Research Council model, which is excellent. Fred, is he gone? Oh, he's back. Yeah, glad you're back. We're just winding down, so we're just looking at modalities. So as well, we look at, for instance, what Fred is working on. How do we collectively bring all the pieces, whether it's social sciences, humanities, physical sciences, to speak of the niche areas. It's all about multidisciplinary, and we're trying to solve challenges in the continent. How do we look at all these models to shape what we're trying to do as a continent? So I'm very excited going forward. I think we'll keep you in the loop. Do you have a pressing question? Yes, please, you can add before we wind down.
So have we definitively then defined who is a postdoc? Because we haven't. Okay.
No, I don't think we would define that.
She said, she was trying to say something. Is it a early career scientist? Is it a... That is something that is...
So what we want to do now is we're not defining what a postdoc is. What we're saying is there are different definitions of postdocs from what we've heard today. And one of the things we need to do is develop that framework document, which will be co-created. As part of that framework document, we will propose modalities of what a postdoc definition might look like. We will share it with you to say, this is the proposition from what we heard. And remember, it's not just about defining, it's about what do we want to achieve at the end of the day as science funders, as programs within the continent, as postdocs within that framework. So we co-create that document, which would define what a postdoc is, the timeframes, the structure of funding postdocs, and the network that we need to tap in going forward within the continent based on this cohort of experts that we have here. So that's a document, I think, from the NRF side we can lead, working with colleagues from the SGCI, because we've got a very good community, and then we'll share it with all of you after we've done like a 5-page draft to say, can you comment on it? And then look at how do we sell this framework document to make it live now, to make it like a living document, and then we start actioning what we are writing. Some of the pieces that came out, for instance, issues around awareness, where if you speak of a postdoc, only people in the science community knows what a postdoc is and what the postdoc does. When you are doing a PhD, your family thinks you've reached the pinnacle, which is correct, of education. But the what next, what they don't know is, yes, you've reached there, but at the end of the day, in terms of opportunities, if you want to go in the academia, you want to teach, they will tell you, no, we don't have opportunities for you. You just become a postdoc, and after a year, you go out. So how do we take all that into consideration to actually come up with a design that can work for the continent? And we shouldn't be scared of dreaming, as long as our dreams are realistic and they can be attained whether in our lifetime or later on. But we've developed that document and we've started a program amongst ourselves. There's Carnegie, there's the Science Granting Council here, councils represented here, that support postdocs going forward. It's not only about the finance. Yes, finances are a challenge at our universities, in our countries, and etc. But let's look beyond finances. Just tapping into this network here, we can do more beyond finances. If you look at even amongst the SGCI, if you look at the countries, if you look at Kenya, look at some of the centers for Canada, if you look at South Africa, we support 250 postdocs in terms of funding every year. Most of them, they come outside from the continent. how do we make sure that other granting councils in the continent start connecting with those postdocs so that they become mentors in their own country of origins, and that network is growing. They look for funding, which doesn't just speak of their host institutions, but funding that can speak of collectively funding or supporting systems across the continent. So there's so much opportunities. Let's not limit ourselves. I'm sure there's a lot we can do as long as the willingness is there from the community here. So I'm looking at us as the drivers. And then let's look at other opportunities of growing beyond these partnerships. How do we tap in the networks that we already have going forward? So I'm excited. I've got the energy. Hopefully we all have the same energy. We're doing this for a better cause. And we'll keep you in the loop. We'll have the network, a list of all the contacts, and we'll be keeping you in the loop in what's happening. The first port will be the website that is being developed for Carnegie. So that will be like an information portal. So we'll put all the key programs for Carnegie, what's happening with the Medical Research Council in Tanzania, NRF, everywhere. That will be like the portal in terms of the postdoc programs. If we develop that framework, it can even serve as a basis of what we want to do going forward out of that network. So very excited. You hear from us going forward, and hopefully we'll make a big difference. Thanks a lot for your active engagement. Lunchtime, is lunch served? Yeah, lunch is 12 to 2. We can go out for lunch.
Thank you, everybody, for your great participation this morning. From the Perka side, it's interesting, it's enriching, and it's fantastic for us to hear your perspectives. And I hope that it's been valuable for you to hear some of our stories and our models. After lunch, just a housekeeping announcement. The Perka group, we will reconvene in the venues we were yesterday. So the program coordinators will move back to our venue. Postdocs will move to the venue where they were yesterday. And I think you're in for a real treat with Prof. Moja, who's going to be doing a really interesting presentation on career development. So I think it fits in beautifully with what we have been talking about today. So enjoy your lunch, and we will see you shortly.